I'm JP Tuesday.
And I'm Kiki Cannon. As lifelong Disney fans, the work of countless talented Disney creatives have shaped our lives.
Now, as the Disney catalog expands, we're taking a journey through film and television to discover if that spark that shaped us as children lives on in adulthood.
Does your favorite Disney media still cast that same spell? Join us as we find out. We are Rewatching the Magic.
Hi, Kiki.
Hi, Tuesday.
This week, we are discussing the Julia Roberts, Richard Gere movie Pretty Woman. And Pretty Woman is an R-rated film. As we do on the podcast, whenever we discuss an R-rated film, we tend to have an R-rated conversation. We understand that there are some of our listeners that like to listen to the podcast with their little ones. We are grateful for that, but this week is not one of those weeks. You can come back next week and we'll be discussing a PG-13 film, but for this week it is an R-rated movie, an R-rated conversation, and yeah. So, Pretty Woman, the movie where a very rich businessman gets it on with a prostitute. There we go. There's your first star rating right there. This is a Disney movie. This is a Touchstone movie. So this has always been a Disney movie. I misremember because I thought this was a Fox movie. But no, this is straight up Disney owned. Always has been.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that this wasn't originally a Disney movie when it was written and sold. This movie has a rather interesting background. And if you ever get to hear Julia Roberts talk about how this movie came about, it's pretty fascinating because this was not her first movie, but this was extremely early in her career. And this movie was originally a movie called 3000, which of course is the amount of money she is offered for a week of her time. And it was originally not a romantic comedy, not a romance, not a comedy. This was supposed to be a gritty drama about the horrors of drug addiction, sex work, class differences in America, all that fun stuff. And Julia Roberts was the first person cast in it. And then somehow, I don't remember who the original studio was that had it, but it was not Disney. It was not Touchstone. It wasn't anything like that. I think it was some kind of independent studio or whatever. But then somehow Touchstone/Disney got a hold of it. And they reworked it as a version of Pygmalion/My Fair Lady. This was under Katzenberg's reign. And Katzenberg was like, yeah, okay, we can rework this incredibly dark film into basically Disney's updated late 80s, early 90s version of My Fair Lady.
They do make a lot of references to what we consider the Disney fairy tale. Cinderella is name dropped, But the Princess in the Tower with the prince climbing, yeah, Tangled wouldn't be about till 20 years later.
They also make some straight up references to My Fair Lady. Because, and we'll get to this when we talk more about the plot, but there is the polo match, and that is just a redo of taking Eliza Doolittle to the horse race. When Disney buys 3000 and decides to turn it into some version of Pygmalion, My Fair Lady, there is an actress attached. Nobody knows who this actress is. She is a relative nobody from Georgia, and Disney does not want her. They start looking around.
I mean, who did Disney want?
Well, they wanted somebody with a bit more name recognition. They wanted Molly Ringwald at one point.
Yeah, I mean,
she turned it down because she did not want to play a prostitute. They looked at both Jennifer Connelly and Winona Ryder for this movie, but they were both too young at the time. Julia Roberts was 21 when they did this movie. And she is older than both Winona Ryder and Jennifer Connelly,
that
if
would have
memory
made
serves.
that would have made this a very different movie.
Yeah, and considering, I mean, for 3000, the original concept, that might have worked. It might have been a bit Taxi Driver, but it might have worked. Gary Marshall championed Karen Allen. Yeah, that Karen Allen from, Indiana Jones. So she would not even audition for it. Apparently, Uma Thurman came through at one point. Meg Ryan a chance for the role because she was big at the time, and they were like, "Hey, we're doing a rom-com. Let's get Meg Ryan."
Disney
When
keeps
have we talked about that before?
Yeah, Disney keeps trying to hire Meg Ryan to do romantic comedies from them, and she keeps saying no.
Apparently Leah Thompson did audition, but she thought it was a drama. And apparently when she found out it was no longer a drama, she wasn't interested. They talked to Daryl Hannah, and she was like, no, I don't want to play a hooker that is degrading to women. Having gone through basically every other actress in Hollywood who turned it down for one reason or another, they went down to Julia Roberts again, and they were like, okay, let's give her a try. She had already done Mystic Pizza, which would become like a cult classic, and she had filmed Steel Magnolias, but it had not come out yet. And of course, she would go on to be nominated for an Oscar for that one, but nobody knew that yet. So,
And just a couple of months after Pretty Woman would come Flatliners.
Yeah, a movie that does not get talked about enough.
I mean, that's right there. Steel Magnolias, Pretty Woman, Flatliners. Boom, boom, boom.
Yeah. They were also having trouble finding a guy, who's going to be her love interest. they went through pretty much every leading man in Hollywood, including at one point Sylvester Stallone. Can you imagine
No.
Sylvester Stallone in this movie?
No.
I do not want to live in. I mean, we always say we live in the worst timeline. I do not want to live in the timeline where Sylvester Stallone is the dude in Pretty Woman. I did watch, as part of my research, a interview with Gary Marshall where he talked about his original idea for the leading man for this was Charles Grodin. He really, really wanted Charles Grodin in this. And apparently Charles Grodin did screen tests with Julia Roberts, and they did not have the correct chemistry. Then they went to Richard Gere, and he originally did not want the part. He was like really against it. And Gary Marshall said in the interview that I watched, he was like, you really just have to meet Julia. And he was like, I've never heard of her. And he's like, yeah, nobody has, but you really need to meet this girl. And they met, and apparently they immediately had chemistry. Because, I mean, can you imagine anybody not having chemistry with Julia Roberts? Like,
No.
She just seems like such a sweetheart. I don't know what she's like in person, but she just seems like one of those people, you know? And apparently that's what it was. And after he met Julia Roberts, he was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And it seems that's how they got Richard Gere for this.
An actor I do want to talk about for this one, in what would end up being his final film role, Ralph Bellamy, as a again, me, kid of the 80s, I'm used to him being evil business owner trying to screw over Dan Aykroyd. But here playing a very kind and benevolent businessman.
You cut out after Dan Aykroyd.
Me, kid of the 80s, used to seeing Ralph Bellamy play evil businessman trying to screw over Dan Aykroyd, and here he's playing a benevolent businessman who's caring about the well-being of his employees. Very different. But he's had a long career.
Yeah, me, a kid of the Universal Monster movies, I'm used in, like the Wolf Man and stuff like that. So, I mean, his career started back in the 30s. And like you said, this would end up being his final movie. He's so very compelling in this because you really do feel for him in that he worked to build this business, and now here's evil Richard Gere. I'm not sure if venture capitalist was the term in use then. I think they were calling them corporate raiders or
hostile takeover almost.
Hostile takeovers or whatever.
And
back then,
as I'm watching the movie, this really does hit home for Disney. We've talked about this on the podcast, how this almost happened to Disney. There was a guy who was buying shares, trying to buy Disney, and he was going to sell it off for pieces.
Yeah, but also this has become, I'm not saying it wasn't common during the 80s, it was becoming more common during the 80s, but right now, as we're recording this is how like most capitalists make their money. You know, buy a business and sell it for parts. And when he tries to explain to Julia Roberts what he does for a living, she says, "Oh, you don't make anything. You don't build anything. You don't produce anything. You know, like you don't do anything useful." And then she compares him to somebody who steals a car and then sells it for parts. Yeah, that's what those people do. They don't do anything useful for society or humanity. They steal a car and they sell it for parts, basically, except it's a corporation. You know, the reason why, even though he's also, you know, a capitalist and a big boss and whatever, the reason you do feel for Ralph Bellamy's character is that at at one point during the film he said, you know, I'm not really that worried for me because we all know that he's a super rich dude. He's gonna be okay no matter how this works out. But he said, I'm worried about the people who work for me because that's what happens in these situations. You know, if somebody like Richard Gere's character in real life comes along and buys one of these corporations and sells it for parts, that's when lots of everyday people lose their jobs.
And how many stories have we talked about with Disney? Like when Disney bought Fox, how many people lost their jobs due to the consolidation of departments?
Yeah, and I mean, it's just, this is what we hear with, like, you know, I don't know about where you live, but where I live, I constantly wake up and discover that my favorite restaurant in town, like chain restaurant, has just closed overnight, and everyone who worked there got a text message that was just like, "We've closed the business, don't come into work."
That just happened to Party City like a month ago as we are recording this. You know, they were all.
Yeah, and it did happen to the Party City in my town, but it happened to like every Party City.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if Party City was bought and sold off and stuff like that, but like when Red Lobster had that problem,
Mhm.
where like Red Lobster was quote unquote going bankrupt and everything, that's not what happened. Red Lobster had a form of hostile takeover, except it was done via real estate buyout. A company bought out all of the land that the Red Lobsters were sitting on and then raised the rent on the buildings and the land that the Red Lobsters were sitting on, and did that for basically every Red Lobster in the nation. It was really insidious and kind of interesting the way they did it, but it was also really unethical the way they did it. And that's why people were suddenly losing their jobs, you know? It wasn't that Red Lobster was like, oh, the infinite shrimp deal or whatever was running them into the ground. It was that a shady corporation was raising their rent so that they could drive them out of business and sell the land, the literal land in the country for more money.
Two more I think I want to talk about before we really get into the plot here. Hector Elizondo as Bernard, the hotel manager. We talked about him when we talked about the Princess Diaries, but if you want to keep the Disney fairy tale tropes of the movie here, he kind of plays the role of fairy godmother in a way.
He was the proto character for Princess Diaries.
Yeah.
It's
Also
almost the same character.
Also directed by Gary Marshall.
Yeah.
And I guess he's our villain for this movie. Jason Alexander as the lawyer.
Yeah, I mean he's definitely the villain in this if we have one.
And we talked about him before in other movies. And cameo, Amy Yesbeck plays a cameo as the lawyer's wife.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, I do want to point out, Hank Azaria has a blink and you'll miss it kind of cameo in this, but that is because this is the first film he was ever in. He is the detective that is standing there right at the beginning of the movie talking about, we have a body in a dumpster. That is Hank Azaria's very first film role. And of course, we've talked about him before because we've talked about Simpsons before and all that. But yeah. So I was kind of shocked that this was an R-rated movie because this was one of my favorite movies when I was a kid. And
which surprises me because you said on this podcast before and told me that you grew up in a very religious household, and this is a movie about a prostitute.
Yes, a woman of the evening, a fallen woman. Yeah. Weirdly, this was one of my mother's favorite movies. And I realized what it was when I was watching the movie for this podcast. And I'm not sure I've ever seen the full cut of this movie before.
You've only seen the TV edit?
I think I may have only ever seen the TV edit before. Because there were some scenes in this movie that I was like, I do not remember this being in this movie. Like, there is a scene where they have sex on a piano, and I was like, I do not remember this scene in this movie. And there are a couple of other scenes like that where this scene goes on a little bit longer than I ever remember it going on.
Yeah.
Like the scene where where she's watching, it's like their first night in the hotel room together, and she's watching I Love Lucy, and then they have sex for the first time, and I was like, oh, I don't remember this scene going on quite as long as it does, and that's because like in the TV edit, it cuts earlier, and in the R-rated edit, I'm okay. Weirdly, the R-rated edit, I'm not sure it would be an R-rated edit if it came out in 2025. This is probably a PG-13 movie in 2025.
You would need to have an alternate scene of Julia Roberts getting her nightie taken up by Richard Gere because, the freeze frame of her with her boobs out circled the net for decades. So that would be the
that is a body double, just FYI.
Yes, I'm aware of that. I have read that. But
I mean, for anybody who needs to know, just putting that out there. Her body double is a woman named Shelley Michelle, and she was known as one of the most used body doubles in Hollywood.
You could get away with the F-bomb because there's one F-bomb in here. For an R-rated movie, I believe it should have used more than one F-bomb. So for PG-13, you have one F-bomb. That's all you would need.
Yeah, I mean, even watching the R-rated cut, I was like, this is really tame for a supposed R-rated movie.
Even by late 80s, early 90s standard.
Yeah, this came out in 1990. And this was the highest grossing R-rated film released by Disney until Deadpool and Wolverine.
And look what's in that movie compared to what's in this movie.
Yeah. As a kid, talking about me not knowing this was an R-rated movie, I guess, like, yes, I grew up in like a very conservative household and stuff, but that doesn't mean that I didn't know what these things were. You had to know what they were to stay away from them, you know? So it's like I knew what these things were, it's just you were supposed to stay away from them. This is overall a movie about like these people, like this guy saving this woman from wickedness and presumably marrying her at the end of the movie, even though they don't really say that.
I mean, we all know Julia Roberts is a runaway bride, but that's a completely different movie.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm not sure I ever saw the full unedited cut until maybe for this podcast. I don't know. Some of the scenes did not look memorable to me, and I have seen this movie so many times.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. I mean, we've talked about this when we talked about another Touchstone movie, Adventures in Babysitting, how it's like I'm used to the original theatrical cut, and then the Disney Plus cut. Like, oh, they changed that. Vivian, Julia Roberts' character, is a very interesting story. When she finally explains her backstory of how she was a kid that always got in trouble. She was always kind of locked in her room by her mom for being a loudmouth, which she still is as an adult in this movie. Her dreams of being a princess, being rescued by a knight, and having terrible luck with men. As she says, she always seems to find the bum, and then she falls in love with the bum, and she ends up moving to LA for a bum who dumps her and leaves her with nothing, with she says she tried other jobs and it never stuck, but with little options, her words, she becomes a prostitute and she makes pretty good money. It's they don't glamorize prostitution, which I do give this movie that credit. They don't make it out to be spectacular or anything, but they don't, whatever the original plot of this movie would have been, that first draft of it being a cautionary tale, let's say, with what the original script would have been. But they don't glamorize it. There's drug use. She knows people that are drug users. You mentioned right at the beginning of the movie, they find a body in the dumpster, and that is another one of the prostitutes that she knows that is a drug addict. Her roommate is a drug addict who is also a prostitute. So it's like they don't glamorize that. And I do give the movie credit for that. I feel they could have gone a little bit further, but I feel like the Disney in this did hold it back. Like you said, this is very tame for an R-rated movie, even by late 80s, early 90s standard.
Vivian mentions that she used to do drugs and that she stopped at 14. I mean, they don't really go into that, but think about it.
Would explain why she's constantly getting in trouble with her mother when she was a kid.
Yeah. I do want to say something about where Vivian is from, because this has always been, if you're from where I'm from, this has always been an interesting little tidbit. When Vivian first meets Edward on the street, he asks her where she's from, and she says Milledgeville, Georgia, which is kind of just down the road from where I'm from. It is not a very large town, and although it is a town with a lot of history. Interestingly, a lot of people think that because Julia Roberts is from Georgia, she just used the name of her hometown. This is not true, because Julia Roberts is from Smyrna, Georgia, which is near Atlanta. It's a suburb-ish kind of Atlanta. They wanted to make Vivian more of a small-town girl, so Julia Roberts put in, they were like, hey, say a more, tiny town in Georgia. And that seems to be what she came up with, and I don't really know why, but that's what she came up with.
And you have the flip side of that, Richard Gere's character, Edward, who has a lot of issues. He even says he paid thousands and thousands of dollars in therapy to deal with his issues. To deal specifically his daddy issues. His father cheated on his mother and left her for another woman, which messed him up. Which probably explains his character at the beginning of the movie. He's very closed off to romantic relationships. He treats romantic relationships like he treats business relationships. You want to get in touch with me, talk to my secretary. To the point where his exes are having more of a relationship with his secretary than with him. To the point where he even talks to one of his ex-girlfriends saying, when we were together, did you talk to my secretary more than you talked to me? And she even says she was a bridesmaid at my wedding. That's how close we were.
Yeah, I did like that joke.
And it's even to the point when they get to the point where she even says, I want more than what this is. He straight up tells her, I can't give you more than this. This is all I have to give you. Being honest with himself, he's saying it straight up to her. I want to spend more time with you. When I come back from New York, let's continue this agreement, this business relationship. But I cannot be the Prince Charming you're looking for. I don't have that in me. Well, number one, at least he's honest about that. Again, even if at that point in the movie he is kind of lying to himself, but at least there is enough of that to admit that I can't be what you want me to be. And again, we know why. He even talks about his various issues with his father, which has shaped his experience in relationships.
One of the things that lets you know what he is like is when they have their first night together and Vivian says, oh, I do everything except I don't kiss on the lips. And his immediate response is, neither do I.
Too personal.
Yeah, too personal. Yeah.
Which, of course, is the hanging fruit until we get to the point where they do kiss on the lips when they have sex. Yay. I mean, the movie does deal with the classism theme. Like you said, the original script had a little bit more of it, but here we have that tiny bit of it and a little bit of the My Fair Lady aspect of it, where he goes to work and he gives her money, say, hey, buy yourself some nice clothes. We're going out tonight. And she goes down to Rodeo Drive to the big fashion stores trying to buy some dresses, and they're like, no, there is nothing here for you. You don't belong here. Please leave.
She only has that one outfit with her, you know, that kind of iconic whatever it is hooker outfit that she has, you know, the white and blue thing with the thigh high boots, you know. And she goes to Rodeo Drive looking like a streetwalker, you know?
Mhm.
And they immediately are like, okay, you're too poor for this shop. You know, you don't have the money for this. And in fact, that is what they say when she says, how much is this dress? And they're like, oh, it won't fit you. And she's like, I didn't ask if it would fit me. I asked how much it is. And they're like, it's very expensive. I'm sure that you've probably had moments in your life like that. I know I have, where you've had somebody look at you and make those snap judgments.
Yeah.
I mean, the both of us for different reasons, of course, but we've both had our moments where, you know, people have rushed to those snap judgments of whether or not we belong places. I mean, I grew up really poor, and there would be occasions like after I got like my first real job and I started to have a little bit of spending money, where I would go into some places and I would get kind of that treatment, you know? And I wasn't even in like Rodeo Drive kind of stores, you know? It's just like, but that vibe of like, oh, you're not you're not one of us, you know? You don't belong here.
But she does get to stick it to him at later in the movie. He's like, oh yeah, do you work on commission? I said, yeah. Well, I was in here the other day and you refused to serve me, and well, I told you I had money and I was spending it. Could have been yours.
Yeah, just the way Julia Roberts delivers that, like, big mistake.
Yeah.
Huge, you know.
Mm.
I think that's every, like, poor person's dream, is just to get, like, just enough money, not like huge wealth, but just enough money to stick it to somebody like that just once in their life.
Yeah.
Just that one person that was an asshole to you. You just want to be able to walk through just one time and be like, you know, if you'd have been nice to me a month ago, I could have helped you out now, but now I'm not gonna because of spite.
Spite is a powerful drug.
Oh, spite will keep you alive in the worst of times.
It's keeping me alive for the next 4 years.
Amen to that. But I want to talk about, because we're at the point where, like, you know, she gets her glow up and all that. This movie is so iconic for the clothing.
Yeah.
And we got to talk about that a little bit. Like I said, this was one of my mother's favorite movies. My mother of dear and blessed memory loved this film, and this whole shopping scene was one of her favorite scenes. She absolutely loved the fashions of this movie. Like when Julia Roberts gets her glow up in this, my mother was obsessed with the fashions she wore after that,
Mm-hmm.
And her favorite was the brown polka dot dress that Vivian wears to the polo match. To the point where my mom even found a similar style dress, and it was one of her favorite things to wear. It was brown, it was polka dot, and the only different thing was it had short sleeves instead of being the sleeveless cut that's on here. And it looked so good on my mom. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, and Larry Miller as a store manager in that scene is perfect.
And Richard Gere has a really good, him as Edward, has this really great line when he talks about how, like, why didn't you buy yourself more than one dress? Because she only has the cocktail dress. She doesn't have any, like, day clothes or anything. And she only has that one cocktail dress because Hector Elizondo sends her to a particular store to meet up with a friend of his who will help her despite anything. And just shout out here because the woman that initially helps her is played by Eleanor Donahue, who helps her get the cocktail dress. And Eleanor Donahue, if you watch a lot of old television, she was on Father Knows Best. She is the oldest daughter on Father Knows Best. So that's, if you're watching and you're like, hey, she looks familiar to me, that's where you know her from. But she also was in an episode of Star Trek for all of the Trekkies out there, one of the original series. There, she's in the episode Metamorphosis, which is the first appearance and first mention of Zephram Cochrane, the inventor of the warp drive. So there you go. If you're wondering why she looks so familiar, yeah. But yeah, when Edward wonders why Vivian only bought the one cocktail dress, she said, "Well, I went down to Rodeo Drive and they were all mean to me, and I don't like." And he has the greatest line, which is, "They're not nice to people; they're nice to credit cards."
It's true.
Which, oh my God, so true. And he takes her down to Rodeo Drive and he's like, "I'm going to show you how to get all of these stuck-up salespeople to be nice to you on Rodeo Drive." And so he does, and he walks in, and that scene between him and Larry Miller as the manager in that clothing store is so hilarious to me. When he walks in and he's like, "Hi, we are about to spend an obscene amount of money in your store, and we need to be sucked up to."
And he's willing to do it. And then, he's saying, well, there's not enough sucking up happening. Well, sir, you're a great businessman. Like, not me, her. Suck up to her.
Yeah, go suck up to the woman. She's the one making the decisions.
It's his, they were mean to her, so they're going to suck up to her.
And the thing is I like when Larry Miller says, so when you say obscene amount of money, do you mean like, I forget exactly how he words it, but he's like, are we talking, like a little upsetting or like really offensive? And he's like, oh, really, really offensive. And he's like, this movie really does incredibly funny lines in it. I was very, we talk a lot about, because we did start off as kind of a nostalgia podcast, and we've talked about how sometimes that nostalgia doesn't always hold up. But I was very pleased that a lot of the humor in this still holds up. There aren't as many cringy moments as I thought there were going to be, because it's been a few years since I've watched this movie.
And apparently the first time you've seen the R-rated cut.
Apparently the first time I've seen the R-rated cut, which I guess I was expecting a little bit of a, kind of a upsetting moment where I was like, oh, out for the TV version or something. But I did not find that to be the case.
I mean, like you said, a couple of scenes shortened and and the swears removed.
Really, the only scenes that were kind of cut out for the TV edit were shortening some of the sex scenes. And the sex scenes in the full version aren't even really that explicit.
Again, to add into the fairy tale aspect, since they really do push the fairy tale in the dialogue. A little bit of Beauty and the Beast, but that movie hadn't come out yet. But still, in terms of, Edward going from this cold, heartless businessman to a very caring human being, he wouldn't blink twice for taking someone's company and scrapping it for parts. But spending that week with Vivian, he now wants to help this company he's trying to purchase, keep it alive. He's becoming a more thoughtful human being. He's taking walks and putting his feet in the grass and just enjoying the smaller things in life more than he would have prior to meeting her.
Yeah, she's teaching him how to be more of a human being.
And it's that last line in the movie that really sums up the entire story, is that what happens after the prince rescues the princess, she rescues him back. And that's kind of what we have here. She's going from being this poor woman working as a prostitute who's had the worst luck in the world to getting together with a very rich man and having that high life, but also he's going from this very cold-hearted businessman to a more well-rounded human being, a nicer person, much to the chagrin of his lawyer. Let's talk about that lawyer now that I've said it. Jason Alexander's character here, Philip. Like, he's just, he's in it for the money. He's in it for the kill, as Edward tells him. They both were cold-hearted businessmen using their acumen to just make more money. He really doesn't become the villain of the story until he finds out that Vivian is a prostitute. Because he thinks that Vivian is a spy for the other company, that he's telling the grandson of the business owner all of the secrets of all of Edward's business secrets and all of that, since they're spending this time together. And he's like, this can't be legal. We have to figure something out. We'll get her. No. She's a prostitute. She's a hooker. I'm paying her to be here. And then he just goes full slime ball, despite the fact that, again, we see that he has a wife. He goes up to her and says, "Oh, yeah, Edward told me you're a whore. Maybe after he had his way with you, maybe we can have a little fun." And, like, he is the bum. He just starts acting like the very bum guys that she's had her entire life. And it just... You could... Very great facial acting by Julia Roberts here, because her facial acting and her body language, like, you can tell she wants to punch the guy in the face, but she doesn't want to cause a scene. And that's what makes Julia Roberts an amazing actress.
When they get back to the hotel afterwards and Edward is so confused as to why Vivian is upset with him, because he keeps asking, "Are you okay?" And she just keeps saying, "Fine," She says, "Why are you having me dress up like this and put on all these manners and stuff if you're just going to go around and tell everybody I'm a streetwalker, In my normal clothes and in my normal manner, I can handle guys like that. It's a mask. It's a way for her to have some armor. That is a costume she puts on when she goes to work. Everybody that's ever worked customer service, you got your customer service voice, And that's kind of her way of doing that. But she says she's taken off guard because she doesn't know how to handle him and try to act quote unquote upper class, for lack of a better term. She's trying to fit in with Edward's group and pretend to be something she's not. And instead, here comes, the skeezy lawyer trying to pick her up as if she was back on her street corner. And you feel for her in that moment because, well, what is she supposed to do?
She even says she was made to feel cheap. Yes, she is a prostitute. She's a street walker. That is her profession, but she was made to feel less than in that moment. And she hates him for it. This is the part where the seeds of them falling in love are put, because she does give him another chance. She says, "Don't do it again." If she had not fallen for him at that point, or at least had any kind of feelings for him, she would have taken that elevator down and been out the door, and the movie would have been over.
Yeah.
And after the business deal goes down, where he says, "I'm going to help you fix your company and not buy it," and Skeevy Lawyer is just, what the fuck? Again, giving Jason Alexander the lone F-bomb in this movie was a nice touch because he delivers it well. But once he goes back to, Edward's hotel and sees Vivian there, like, "I'm looking for Edward." "Well, he's not with me. I thought he was with you." "Well, he's not with me. I don't think he's been with me for a while. Seems to be with you. Whatever you're doing to him, you've changed him. He's no longer the cold-hearted businessman he's been with me for the last 10 years. And maybe if I get
He's no longer the evil bastard I grew to love.
basically, and maybe, you fucking him will make him a better man. Maybe me fucking you will make me a better man. And he attempts to rape her. Right there in the hotel room. He hits her. Like, by this point, he has gone full villain. Because his business partner, his client, I wouldn't say friend, but he's definitely changed Edward, and Skeevy Lawyer Man does not like this. And he wants to take it out on her. Because he didn't used to be this way until he met her, so he's going to punish her for it. He even says, this is not a home, this is a hotel room. You're not the little woman, you're a whore.
I want to point out, good for Vivian in that when he starts to attack her, she bites the absolute fuck out of his hand.
Yeah. And of course, Edward just comes in to save the day, punches the shit out of Jason Alexander. And it's like, yeah, it's a movie, but it's very cathartic because you kind of want him to for at least the second half of the movie. But yeah, by this point, they both, Vivian and Edward, are kind of different people than they were at the beginning of that week. By this point, they have kissed while they had sex, and she thinks that he's asleep, and she says that she loves him. And it's the next day where he said, I heard what you said, and I can't give you that. But again, by that point, he's just lying to himself. He has changed. He may not be ready to admit it at that point in the movie, but he has changed.
Yeah, I don't think he understands it himself yet. I don't think he understands it until the point where he refuses to go in for the kill on the hostile takeover.
And I will say the music in this movie is very... We talked about it last week with Brother Bear, how music can tell a great story. This is Pretty Woman, and there's a lot of great early 90s hits in here. The King of Wishful Thinking is one of my favorite songs. And it's played right at the beginning of the movie. And it kind of reflects both characters. And every time you hear one of these songs in the movie, whether the tone of the music or the lyrics are telling the story of these characters. By the time Vivian leaves, there's that song, I had it, but I lost it. It was love, but it's over now. Again, another one of my favorite early 90s songs. And it's so beautifully woven into that scene where they depart from the hotel. She goes back to her old apartment and she realizes, I can't live here anymore. I cannot be a prostitute anymore. I cannot live in Los Angeles anymore. I'm going to go home.
No, not even going home. She's going to move to San Francisco.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. I mean, they were just in San Francisco to see the opera. So, a new life, a new everything. Because there's too much in LA that reminds her of him. Even though he's going to New York,
And for anybody who has watched this movie and is not really an opera fan, the opera that he takes her to see is La Traviata, and that opera is about a prostitute who falls in love with a rich guy. So just in case you wanted to know Yeah. It's actually a really good opera if you ever get to see it. I highly recommend it. I am a fan of opera, so yeah.
And I do love how he says, people have extreme feelings about opera. They either love it or they hate it. And by the end of the opera, she's, Vivian is there, tears in her eyes. She may not understand what they're saying, but the passion in their voices and the context of the actors, what they're doing, is enough to tell her the story.
One of my favorite lines in the movie is when she said, I liked it so much I almost peed my pants. And the old woman she's talking to says, what? And he says, oh, she said she liked it better than Pirates of Penzance, which I've always found funny because as a kid, one of my favorites was Pirates of Penzance.
Fox has a version of Pirates of Penzance.
Is
That
it the
could
one
be.
I like?
It's the pirate movie. Have you ever seen the pirate movie?
No.
Yeah, it's
I
Fox.
grew up watching the version of Pirates of Penzance with Linda Ronstadt, and
No, this one does not have Linda Ronstadt in it.
yeah, if you ever get to see the version with Linda Ronstadt, it's amazing. Speaking of the music in this movie, the score is done by James Newton Howard. This is a really interesting score as well as the pop music that is woven in as well. So,
And of course, you have a movie called Pretty Woman. Roy Orbison's Oh Pretty Woman does play in the film very briefly.
yeah, during the Rodeo Drive sequence and then again at the end of the movie over the credits.
Hmm.
While we're talking about the soundtrack, watching this again, it was just such a flashback to my childhood because you were talking about King of Wishful Thinking, which I love that song as well. And It Must Have Been Love, which yeah. Um, and then of course there's the scene where she's waiting for him in the hotel room after the big shopping spree and she's only wearing a tie
Yeah.
when she makes the guy in the shop give her his tie because she thought that Richard Gere would like it.
And he does wear
And
that same tie later in the movie.
yeah, and he's wearing the tie later in the movie. But of course, the song that's playing as she's waiting for him is Songbird by Kenny G, which, if you were alive at the time this movie came out, that song was inescapable, and weirdly, you do not hear it anymore. Like, not even on quote unquote oldies channels. I hate that we're old enough for oldies channels, but there you go.
Yeah. You're old when you hear the song from your childhood on the oldie station. And, I don't know if it counts, but there's a scene where Julia Roberts sings Prince's Kiss.
Oh, it totally counts because remember at this time, I've talked about it before. At this time, I was not allowed to listen to popular music, so her singing that little bit of the Prince song was the first time I ever heard that song. Let's talk about how this movie ends and how it differs from the original planned ending when it was a gritty movie called 3000. So, how the movie ends as we know it is Edward is like, hey, stay with me because you want to stay with me and not because I'm paying you anymore. And Vivian's like, nah, I need to go off and do my own thing.
She wants the fairy tale, and he can't give
Yeah,
her the fairy tale.
So she's like, I'm going to take this money. I'm going to move away to San Francisco, like we said. She goes back to her apartment. She goes back to Kit, her roommate, and she's like, hey, take this money, get out of sex work, do something else, you know?
Yeah, and she says she's going to go back to school.
Yeah, and Vivian says she's going to move to San Francisco, finish her high school diploma, which she said earlier in the movie she never finished. Kit decides she's going to go to beauty school and try to get out of sex work herself. The last we see of Kit, she's trying to get another girl out of sex work and talk her into being her new roommate and saying, I've just enrolled in beauty classes and so, I need a new roommate and all that. So it does seem like Kit is on the right path at the end of the movie. At least the way this movie considers the right path. Vivian is waiting for, she's packed up and she's waiting for the time to leave to go to the bus. And that's when she hears the limo coming up that has Edward in it because he's decided to come be the White Knight.
He's holding an umbrella like a sword. He's got a bouquet of flowers. Princess Vivian, come down. Your Princess Weir.
And she's like, nope, you got to come up here. And he's like, because we know from earlier in the movie that he doesn't like heights and he doesn't want to climb the fire escape to her apartment.
He's got to prove himself. Hey, you won or you got to get her.
Yeah. And he does. It's awkward, but he does.
This is kind of... it's another Richard Gere movie, but it's very the opposite of An Officer and a Gentleman.
Yeah. But, they have their little moment of like, oh, I'm here to rescue you, and oh, rescue right back and everything. So they have their happy ending. You have the feeling that they're going to be together, they're going to get married eventually, happily ever after. Okay. Now, if you read interviews or listen to interviews with the screenwriter of the original 3000, a guy named J.F. Lawton. So the screenwriter says that the reason that this movie has such a saccharine happy ending, other than Disney buying it and whatever, is because Richard Gere and Julia Roberts have such amazing, adorable chemistry together. Now, when this movie was called 3000, according to everyone who read the original script and the interviews that I've watched over the years and in doing research for this episode, the original script for 3000, their week together ended and Edward drives Vivian back to where he found her, shoves this drug-addicted streetwalker out of his car, tosses the cash onto her as she lays on the sidewalk, and then the screen goes blank as we see her just laying on the sidewalk with the cash on top of her. There's no love between them. There's no... She uses him, he uses her. she ends up right back where she started, a drug-addicted streetwalker, but she's $3,000 ahead, which she will probably use for more drugs.
Pretty woman walking down the
Walking down the
street.
street. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, seriously, it was meant to be like a seriously cautionary tale about how horrible it was for exploited sex workers in Los Angeles in the 80s. I mean, it was not supposed to pull any punches, the original script. And took that script and we've turned it into Pretty Woman walking down like.
And I mean, I think you're right, because I don't know if that would have been an ending that would have been satisfactory given these two actors and their chemistry. Like, you want to see these two characters fall in love. You want to see these characters be together at the end of the movie.
Well, the thing is, both of these are good actors. They may have been able to pull off that original. I mean, I've seen Richard Gere play some really dark characters.
He doesn't believe in anything else but love.
Yeah, and I mean, Julia Roberts is also an incredible dramatic actress.
Had this movie stayed a drama, I could see them both pulling it off. But again, this being now a romantic comedy, this now being a Disney production, I think you're right, and that's what changed the ending of this movie, what changed this whole movie to begin with. Like, if this was not a Disney movie, let's say if this was a Warner Brothers movie or an MGM movie and a hard R-rated movie, you might have had Jason Alexander's character rape her. And there might not have been a save there. You know?
Yeah, I mean, anything could have happened if they'd have gone the original way. I'm not even sure that Richard Gere would have been in this if this had gone the original way, you know?
Yeah.
But this is a really fascinating turn of events of how you go from something like 3,000 to Pretty Woman, you know?
Just on the chemistry of two actors.
And the fact that Disney got a hold of the property.
Yeah.
I mean, like, let's not downplay the fact that that's what happened, you know?
Yeah. So, Kiki, does Pretty Woman have the magic?
Oh, it still does. Like I said, I was very surprised that this held up as well as it did, because it has been a while since I've seen it in any form. And the fact that it wasn't cringy, I mean, it's as cringy as any romantic comedy.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about that before, that this is not my favorite genre. But for a romantic comedy, the jokes are not like, ooh, that didn't age well. You know, like,
mm-hmm.
I was very surprised that this held up as well as it did, given the premise and given that it's a romantic comedy, etc., etc. I did not find myself going like, ooh, I forgot about that. Ooh, I wish they hadn't have done that one, you know?
I'm going to say yes, it has the magic. Again, I think you're right in that there's a lot of these romantic comedies that don't age well. And a lot of, even that some of the touchstone movies haven't aged well. And the fact that this still is a classic in its own right is a testament. So much though that they made a musical out of it. Pretty Woman the musical It started in Chicago in 2018, beginning of 2018, before heading to Broadway at the end of 2018. Currently on its North American tour. I did, and so if you are interested in the Pretty Woman musical, seeing this on stage, check it out. This is not a paid advertisement. It's like, if you like Pretty Woman the movie and you want to see how they translate that to the stage, go for it.
Interestingly, the book for the musical, written by Gary Marshall and J.F. Lawton, the writer of 3000. So, yeah. And the music and lyrics are by Bryan Adams and Jim Vallance.
Yes, so, that Bryan Adams.
Yeah, that Bryan Adams. So,
yeah. So if you're interested, check it out. Again, it's on tour. As for next week, we are about to enter a brave new world with Sam Wilson's first theatrical appearance as Captain America. So in honor of that, we are going back to Sam Wilson's very first appearance in the MCU, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. It's been a while since we talked about the character of Captain America, and it's really good it's going to be good to come back to Cap in the modern world for the first time, post-Avengers. And, considering what's been going on in the world, Captain America punching Hydra in the face is probably what's needed.
Yep. Everybody go punch some Hydra in the face.
Yup. So come back next week for Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and we will talk to you all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Don't let the magic stop here.
Keep the conversation going. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Rewatching the Magic.
We are also on Blue Sky, rewatchingthemagic.bsky.social. And new episodes are available every Monday at rewatchingthemagic.podbean.com and youtube.com/@rewatchingthemagic. Remember, the magic is for everyone.
It only stops if you let it.
We know that right now, things are tough.
But in the words of Jim Henson, the only way the magic works is by hard work. But hard work can be fun.
Check out our show notes for ways that you can help.